Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Douglas MacKenzie with news from Scotland and around the world tonight. I'm joined for a discussion on the main topics in the news by writer William Duguid, a long-standing friend of the programme. Hello and welcome, William.
Hello and welcome to you, Douglas.
Thank you. Okay, as usual, we start tonight with an update on news from Ukraine on this day 852 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. On Sunday, Russia claimed that the US was responsible for a Ukrainian attack on the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula, in which 5 US-supplied missiles were reported to have killed 4 people, including 2 children, and injured 151 more. The Defense Ministry in Moscow said US specialists had set the ATACMS missiles' flight coordinates on the basis of information from US spy satellites, meaning Washington was directly responsible. 1 person was killed and 3 injured in Russia's Belgorod region bordering Ukraine when 3 Ukrainian drones attacked the city of Graivoron, Regional Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said. Air defences overnight shot down 33 Ukrainian drones over Russia's western Bryansk, Smolensk, Lipetsk and Tula regions, the Russian Defense Ministry said Sunday. A new attack on Kharkiv killed at least 1 person and wounded 11 on Sunday, according to local officials. Mayor Igor Terekov said the city was attacked by a guided bomb and that around half of Kharkiv was without electricity because of the strike. Ukraine's energy operator Ukrenergo said on Sunday that Ukraine's energy operator Ukrenergo said on Sunday that rolling electricity blackouts would be imposed nationwide throughout Monday because of increased Russian attacks on power stations. Ukraine has had to impose power restrictions since May due to intense Russian attacks. The more severe power outages will start from midnight Sunday and last until midnight Monday, Ukrenergo said. Serbia has sold hundreds of millions of dollars of ammunition to Western countries that have likely helped Ukraine's fight against Russia, President Alexander Vučić said in an interview with the Financial Times. Russia and Serbia have traditionally been close, but the Financial Times reported on Saturday that exported ammunition that ended up in Ukraine through third countries is estimated at about 800 million euros, a figure that the Serbian president acknowledged in the interview was largely accurate. The UN's nuclear watchdog on Sunday called for a halt to attacks on Enerhodor, a town near the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, after drone strikes this week hit 2 electricity substations serving the area. The plant's Russian-installed officials accused Ukraine of staging 2 drone strikes that destroyed 1 substation, damaged another, and cut power to residents for a time. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, made no reference to Ukraine, but said, whoever is behind this, it must stop. Well, lots of conflicting stories coming out of Ukraine. Good news for Ukraine. President Zelensky acknowledging that the Russian attack on Kharkiv has failed, but still there are the Russians supposedly making progress capturing villages in Donetsk. How do you assess the current situation and the way forward, William?
It's difficult to see the way forward. I do agree that Russia has been making progress in recent weeks and months, and that this is continuing at one rate or another. And it remains the case that it's who's able to supply which side with what weaponry that may advance the cause one way or the other. And I think we're still at a very uncertain phase, which is why we're hearing about things on both sides. Then again, there are recurring stories. There are always recurring stories. And Zaporizhzhia, of course, has featured in many past stories to do with Ukraine. And that's a concern about any activity there that's likely to cause any sort of explosion or something worse. The long-term game is the geopolitical game, and that's what's going on right now. certainly with the West's support for Ukraine. That's as much geopolitical manoeuvring as anything else. And of course, on the other side, China in the background, and basically through proxies such as North Korea, where Putin has just visited, arranging for weapons to come into Russia, possibly with a pro quo, and that's an interesting one on that score. So, yeah, it's over 850 days now, and it continues, and it will come to an end. But at this stage, it's impossible to guess where it's actually going to end up.
Thank you. A further question on that. At the weekend, Phillips O'Brien, who's Professor of Strategic Studies at St Andrews University, wrote that the last 6 months have shown that Ukraine can win this war, but it will win this war if we supply the weapons which will allow them to win it, and not, as we're doing at the moment, supplying the weapons which prevent them from losing it. Is that a statement you would agree with?
It's probably true, but what would be the consequences? I mean, are we talking about ultimately NATO and the West getting involved in a land war, or are we simply saying different sorts of weapons? I think it is true that if the West poured more resources into Ukraine's efforts, then they might make progress back again, some of the progress that's been lost. But I think we need to be looking at the stage where we're trying to work our way out of this war, because we've been going now for nearly 2.5 years, and it has the potential for disaster and for escalation. Not the only spot in the world where that's the case, but certainly true of Ukraine. So, yes, I would tend to agree with the assessment, but I'm not all that content with the implications of it.
Okay, thank you. Moving on now to the latest from Gaza. At least 37,598 people have been killed and 86,032 wounded in Gaza since October the 7th, according to the Gaza Health Authority. An Israeli airstrike at a medical clinic in Gaza City killed Hani al-Jafarawi, the director of Gaza's Ambulance and Emergency Department, the territory's health ministry has said. In its latest operational update, Israel's military has claimed to have killed a senior Hamas figure who was responsible for projects and development in Hamas weapons manufacturing headquarters, and said it is continuing operations in Rafah and in central Gaza. The Al-Quds Brigades has claimed an attack on Israeli ground troops operating inside Rafah. UN RWA chief Philippe Lazzarini said the international community should push back against Israel's efforts to have the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees disbanded. Israel has long been critical of the agency's mandate, but it now seeks to end UN RWA's operations, dismissing the agency's status as a UN entity supported by an overwhelming majority of member states. If we do not push back, other UN entities and international organizations will be next, further undermining our multilateral system. 193 UN RWA personnel have been killed in Gaza since Israel began its assault on the territory. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the most intense phase of the assault against Hamas in Gaza is coming to an end, freeing up forces to move to the Lebanese border, where escalating exchanges of fire with the militant group Hezbollah have increased fears of a wider war. Netanyahu's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has said it is my life's mission to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state. He told a meeting of the Religious Zionism Party, "We will establish sovereignty in Judea and Samaria," an Israeli name for the occupied West Bank, first on the ground and then through legislation. I intend to legalize the young, that is, illegal settlements. Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock will make her 8th trip to the region since the 7th of October attacks. She is to hold talks in Israel, the West Bank and Lebanon with a view to contributing to de-escalation amid fears of war with Hezbollah. An Israeli court has extended the detention of Rasha Hizala, a journalist working for the Palestinian news agency Wafa. She is to be detained until 11th of August. An Israeli commission investigating suspected wrongdoing in government purchases of submarines and missile boats from Germany issued a warning to Netanyahu on Monday. The panel notified the Prime Minister that based on evidence gathered thus far, it could ultimately determine that he had used his position as Prime Minister between 2009 and 2016 to greenlight the purchases without due process. Greece's foreign minister said today that threats by Iran-backed Hezbollah against Cyprus were unacceptable, and the EU would stand by member states against all such threats. So, William, where do things go in Gaza? We have Annalena Baerbock trying to push for de-escalation. Everyone has pushed for de-escalation, but nothing has de-escalated.
No, it has not. And to a certain extent, I think Netanyahu's political survival depends on there being a state of conflict in one place or another. The wider war with Hezbollah is what we're beginning to see happen now, with the apparent statement that the most intense phase of the war in Gaza is done. There'll just be what is quaintly and not a very good term, but mowing operations going on rather to try to prevent Hamas from reviving itself. That's a rather sinister kind of terminology. But all eyes do turn to Lebanon and the possibility of Iran being drawn in, and then what happens to the US. So it's absolutely vital that de-escalation takes place. Whether it will or not, because nothing seems to reverse this tide, nothing that we've seen so far anyway, we will just have to wait and see. But as I supplied previously, this is another of the trouble spots in the world where there is the capacity to move into utter catastrophe, and that has to be stopped at all costs.
Thank you. Not the most cheerful prognosis. Turning now to home news and the general election campaign. First with the Tories in the UK generally and in Scotland. Rishi Sunak joined Douglas Ross and the Scottish Conservatives in Edinburgh today for the launch of the Tories' Scottish Manifesto. The manifesto is targeted at unionist voters and calls on them to vote tactically in seats where the Tories and SNP are challenging each other to win. Sunak called on unionist voters to put independence on the back burner for a generation. Responding to the Scottish Conservatives' manifesto launch, the SNP's candidate for Gordon and Buchan, Richard Thompson, said, "After 14 years of disaster after disaster from Westminster, it's clear the Tories' obsession with the SNP is all they have left." The Tory manifesto mentioned the SNP 88 times in 76 pages. They are rattled because they know a well-deserved democratic drubbing is on its way, and here in Scotland, a vote for the SNP is the best way to get rid of every single Tory MP. In England, the Conservatives are rerouting resources to defend at least 3 seats held by cabinet ministers, with majorities of more than 20,000 as the party retreats to safer ground. Tory activists and candidates in nearby areas have been diverted to campaign for James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, and Steve Barclay, the Environment Secretary. So, William, what is your assessment of the Tories? Are they a completely sinking ship?
It looks that way. You never know. I thought that was the case in 1992, but they turned out to survive that. However, this election campaign has been absolutely riven with fairly calamitous errors. You almost wonder if Rishi Sunak didn't call the election because of a sort of spite, because he was about to suffer an internal threat, because the way he's conducted the campaign has been totally against his own party's interests, as far as I can see. And now they're thrown back on defending the seats of certain favoured candidates, so that we don't have too many Portillo moments, as they might be called. So not looking good for the Tories. And as far as their Scottish manifesto is concerned, putting independence on the back burner for a generation, I don't think that will get very much support. It has to be said that too many people voting Labour in Scotland might also put independence on the back burner. But their obsession with the SNP knows no bounds. That's a good statistic that Richard Thompson quoted about, was it 88 mentions and 76 pages
Yes.
of the SNP. Yep, a sinking ship. Yeah, I think I'd go along with that.
Okay, turning to the Labour Party, and noting that both Conservative and Labour had dropped by 4 points in the latest opinion polls. The Institute of Fiscal Studies, IFS, has said that UK finances are a mess, and Tories and Labour are keeping public in the dark. The IFS were also dismissive of plans by Lib Dems and Reform UK. The IFS said that UK public services, everything from the NUS to the NHS to prisons, are visibly struggling, and fresh cuts of between 10 billion and 20 billion will be on the way for unprotected Whitehall departments if the party elected on July the 4th wants to reduce debt and avoid raising taxes. The SNP has accused Labour of abandoning its principles, as Anas Sarwar was unwilling to commit to repealing the two-child cap and rape clause on a BBC interview. Mr Sarwar said the Labour Party believed the best way out of poverty is work, echoing the policies of former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith. So how do you see the state of the Labour Party in Scotland? They had a huge gap over the SNP, which has narrowed and perhaps is still narrowing.
It's difficult to tell. The polls are kind of all over the place, and I think it will be a bit of a geographical difference. I do expect Labour to do well in the central belt, and I would be quite surprised if the SNP managed to narrow the gap there. However, they're not going to make much headway in places such as Perth and Kinrossshire, where I am. That's more likely to be SNP versus the Tories. Labour nationally, and by nationally I mean throughout the UK, are, I think, in for a thumping majority, and a lot of that will be Scottish. The question is just how many seats the SNP will manage to hold on to, and where that will then take discussions about independence. Because one thing that will have to happen if Labour do well is that some independent supporters will have voted for them. I wouldn't recommend that, because I do think that helps to put independence on the back burner. But they need to come to some sort of accommodation with that, you would hope. And the independence movement needs to work out a way to respond to it as well. So in many ways, it's going to be interesting, those first couple of weeks in July, when we're adjusting to the election result, to see exactly what happens on that score.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the SNP and their activities in Scotland. Campaigning in the North East today, First Minister and SNP leader John Swinney visited Montrose Port and later made a speech at the Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. In his speech, Mr Swinney reminded people that 8 years ago today, the Brexit referendum result was announced. And despite people in Scotland having voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, in every one of Scotland's local authority areas, Scotland was taken out of the EU anyway. He said Scotland had been left to deal with the consequences, not just of a Brexit the country did not vote for, but the consequences of a hard Brexit. Scotland's Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes, MSP, warned of the acute damage done to Scotland's Highlands by a Westminster-imposed Brexit, as she launched the SNP's Highlands Manifesto, saying that only the SNP is standing up for Highland communities. She said the Highlands Manifesto emphasises the damage of Brexit, with the loss of freedom of movement, Erasmus Plus, and EU funding over a decade of Westminster cuts decimating Scotland's public services, and a cost of living crisis which has sent energy bills and food prices soaring. So both John Swinney and Kate Forbes today focusing on Brexit. Is that a vote winner?
I think it should be. It's certainly at the centre of their campaign. Their campaign has been described as ABC, so it's austerity, Brexit, and cost of living. And today was very much Brexit Day, and no surprise, since it's 8 years to the day since the result was announced. And I think there's little denying that Brexit has been a catastrophe for many parts of Scotland, and many industries within Scotland. And it's absolutely right to draw attention to them. And also the fact that we were dragged out against our will and against the will of every region of Scotland. We all voted to stay in, and we're all being pulled out. And that tends to allow the emphasis on as not being a partnership of equal nations, and almost with Westminster having a sort of know thy place attitude. And I think it's absolutely right to press those buttons. The question is, will people be listening to that, even if they believe it in their hearts, or do they want to punish the SNP for faults perceived or faults actual, depending on your view of how the last few years in Holyrood have gone, and indeed your view of the SNP's commitment to independence. But I think they're pressing absolutely the right buttons. Not everybody agrees with that. Leslie Riddoch thinks they should maybe try a few different things. But I think if you have an interesting and good message and you repeat it, that's probably to your advantage. So that's why they're doing this.
Okay, thank you, William. Moving overseas again and to Dagestan. Gunmen opened fire in two cities in Russia's North Caucasus region of Dagestan, targeting a synagogue, two Orthodox churches, and a police post, and killing at least 15 police officers and a priest, according to reports in Russian media. This is a day of tragedy for Dagestan and the whole country, Sergei Melikov, governor of the Dagestan region, said in a video published early today on social media. In the city of Derbent, gunmen attacked a synagogue, home to a Jewish community in the predominantly Muslim region. Russia's state media TASS said the attackers also shot at two nearby Orthodox churches, killing a police officer and a priest. Footage published on social media from Derbent showed a group of gunmen engaged in heavy fire with police. Officials said the Derbent synagogue was set on fire, and the clip from the scene appeared to show flames coming out of the building, which is listed as a UNESCO heritage site. In a separate shooting, which occurred simultaneously, a group opened fire on police in Makhachkala, the capital of Dagestan, located about 75 miles north along the Caspian Sea coast. According to local authorities, at least one police officer was killed and 6 others injured. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the attacks. Melkov said that among the dead, in addition to the police officers, were several civilians, including an Orthodox priest who worked in Derbent for more than 40 years. Melikov said that 6 of the gunmen were shot and killed. However, the National Anti-Terrorist Committee has put the number of gunmen killed at 5. Russia's investigative committee has classified the shooting as a terrorist attack and has opened an investigation. William, Dagestan is not a country on everyone's lips in Scotland, and the reports from commentators from there, from Ukraine, from Russia, have been varied. Some saying it's an independence movement and the start of the collapse of the Russian Federation. Others saying it's an ISIS attack, punishing the Russians for their coziness with the Taliban. And of course, Russian telegram channels are saying, oh, it was the Ukrainians who did it. Can you give us any insight into Dagestan and the importance of the North Caucasus republics?
Well, the North Caucasus republics are a particularly restive part of the Russian Federation, and there have been problems there in the past. Famously, there were wars in the 1990s, but there was also quite a lot of stuff going on in the 2000s. Then just last October, there was an anti-Semitic riot at Dagestan airport, where they were looking for Jewish passengers coming on of planes. And they were also looking at hotels, trying to find Jewish people in the rooms. So there has been a lot going on over the years, and there are various tensions there. I think we can pretty well rule out the sort of standard knee-jerk Russian response that it's the West who's been fomenting this. I don't believe that. I think the seeds of this have been going for quite a while, and this is just the latest episode. People are not well off. It's a diverse population, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I mean, we might see it as good, but they might not. High levels of unemployment, and indeed struggles with Islamic radicalism. And I would tend to put this one down to the Islamic radicalism, bearing in mind that the targets, amongst the targets anyway, were a synagogue and a church. I think it's one of these things that flares up every so often. It sounds like it's been a particularly violent outburst, but I think we will see more of that. And it does call into question about the overall security of Russia, and perhaps that the security services might be distracted by the Ukraine war. So they're effectively having to fight, if not an internal war, an internal skirmish, and have some sort of skirmish on two fronts as a result.
Okay, thank you. Now back to Scotland again, and planning and regulation of processions. New proposals to improve the planning and regulation of public processions and marches are to be introduced to uphold the rights of safe and peaceful assembly. An action group set up to consider how to better facilitate processions has set out 6 recommendations in a newly published report, which has been accepted by the Scottish Government, the local authority group COSLA, and Police Scotland. The recommendations include extending a pilot programme following successful evaluation in April 2024 to train stewards and marshals to build their capacity to plan, prepare and manage processions and other forms of public gathering in a safe way. Developing a minimum standard for information provided on the notification process for processions. Providing consistent information on local authority websites that ensures transparency and confidentiality. Statutory organisations, including local authorities, Police Scotland and the Scottish Government, to work together so information they provide relating to marches is clear and easy to understand. Developing or improving training packages for local authority officials and elected members to enable the sharing of good practice to facilitate peaceful public processions on how to protect human rights. The consideration of an annual review mechanism that contributes to the sharing of best practice and learning of management of processions, and developing or improving training practices for local authority officials and elected members to enable the sharing of good practice to facilitate peaceful public processions. Community Safety Minister Siobhan Brown said, "The Scottish Government established the action group to ensure that processions are conducted safely and peacefully across the country. I'm grateful to the members of the group for these carefully considered recommendations, which represent the culmination of extensive work by partners. The freedom of peaceful assembly is a cornerstone of a democratic society, and it is vital that the right training, planning and regulations are in place so processions run smoothly while ensuring those attending and surrounding communities are kept safe. In accepting the recommendations of the Action Group's report in full, what is clear is that achieving success must be a joint endeavour. We will work with Police Scotland, COSLA and members of the group to implement the recommendations as quickly as possible." Well, the Scottish Government set up a short life working party a couple of years ago, which came to the conclusion that we didn't need a national body like the Parades Commission in Northern Ireland to manage processions. Is this a good way forward, do you think?
I think it's a good way forward, as long as it doesn't have any sort of chilling effect on what you might call ad hoc marches. I mean, clearly marches that are arranged sometime in advance, and that would include all under one banner marches, it would include Believe in Scotland marches, and of course it would also include a whole bunch of orange walks during the summertime. And as long as it helps these to pass off successfully and without any danger to those taking part, and indeed without too much disruption, and that's where the stewarding does come in, then I think it's a good thing. How it would work with something called ad hoc, as many, for example, of the Gaza demonstrations during the autumn and the first part of the winter were very much arranged at the last minute. Whether it's going to work so successfully with that, I don't know. But I think it's a reasonably enlightened attitude, concentrating on the training of stewards, and concentrating on review, and talking about peaceful protest as being the cornerstone of democracy. I think that is a good line to be taking, and it certainly is not something that we've seen in other places, which almost seems to be working against any sort of protest happening. So I hope it is successful in its outcomes as it appears to be in its objectives. And I wish it well.
Good, thank you. Now the thorny problem of housing. The monthly mortgage of a first-time buyer has soared by more than 60% to exceed £1,000 a month since the last general election, according to figures that underline the financial challenge facing people in the UK trying to gain a foothold on the housing ladder. Over the last 5 years, the average mortgage payment for a typical first-time buyer in the UK has risen by 61% to £1,075 a month, up from £667 in 2019, according to the property website Rightmove. The increase of about £400 a month is linked to the march of house prices and interest rates, which have heaped financial pressure on borrowers, whose average wages have grown by just 27% over the same period. The financial squeeze has forced many younger borrowers to either look for smaller properties or to take out an ultra-long mortgage. The calculations made various assumptions, including that first-time buyers would have a 20% deposit to put down, that their mortgage term would last 25 years, and that they were taking out a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage on an average rate. The average first-time buyer home in the UK now costs £227,757, a 19% rise since 2019. Last week, the Bank of England held interest rates at 5.25% for the seventh consecutive time, keeping borrowing costs higher for longer. William, neither you nor I are first-time buyers, I suspect. But do we just look at the situation and say, this is a pity, and wring our hands? Or are there things which can actively be done by government, by the banks, whoever, to alleviate the problem for young people?
I think things have to be done because we're at the stage now where we seem to have a kind of runaway train. Right now, yes, interest rates are 5.25%, and they may be on the way down, not just now, but maybe later in the summer. But it won't take much for the circumstances to arise to send them back up again. And then you've got that ongoing problem. When I was a first-time buyer, the first mortgage I ever got was 12.5%, but the difference was that I was only borrowing £80,000. Property prices have gone literally, not literally, metaphorically, through the roof since then, and they're going up far, far faster than wages. Housing is too expensive. Things government can do, maybe it can accelerate the building of genuinely affordable homes, and those could be affordable homes for purchase, but they could also be affordable homes for rent. And I would be talking there about the reintroduction, effectively, of council housing, which has, since Margaret Thatcher, not been such a feature of the housing scene. But we can't go on with actually having a roof over your head being out of the reach of ordinary people, particularly young people who are not necessarily earning that much yet. But for that sort of revolution to take place, it would cost a lot of money, and neither of the main contenders to be the government of the UK is showing any sign of that kind of revolutionary approach. The Tories are talking about stamp duty levels and keeping them frozen, the threshold frozen, so that you don't necessarily run into stamp duty, except possibly if you're in London, where the average first-time buyer house is costing over £500,000 now. Labour are talking about a mortgage guarantee scheme, which will allow 95% mortgages and support lenders in that. But that doesn't do any good if the interest rates are as high as they are now, and that is going to be an ongoing feature. So there needs to be a radical change. I don't see it happening, but we have to make property, whether you're actually buying it or whether you're renting it, more affordable. And if we don't, I don't quite know where things end up.
Yeah, that's interesting. You touched on the point there of building affordable rental housing. It seems to be a tenet of belief throughout the United Kingdom since the days of Thatcher that you should own your own home, which of course is not the case in most other European countries. Is it time for a change of attitude here?
I think a change of attitude would do a lot of good. It's absolutely true that the rented sector is much more important than in many, particularly European countries, than it is here. And there's no particular reason to stick to something that's effectively impoverishing you when there might be other solutions available to you. So, yeah, a change of attitude so that ownership of your own home is not the be all and end all. Security in your own home, of course, has to be absolutely,
Hmm.
but ownership, no, it doesn't have to be. It's just a thing we decided to do 40 years ago and we're still clinging to.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Moving across the Atlantic now to the United States, President Biden has marked the second anniversary of the US Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, with a video in which he pledges to restore the right to an abortion and protect American freedom. If he is re-elected, the 45-second video was issued 2 years to the day since the court's decision in Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization reversed nearly half a century of guaranteed federal abortion rights. The advertisement puts abortion services at the center of Biden's presidential campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris has recently been giving press interviews on abortion, and today several groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union, the Center for Reproductive Rights and Reproductive Freedom for All, announced a $100 million Abortion Access Now campaign across several states. In Biden's video, the president puts the responsibility for reversing abortion rights squarely on Donald Trump, quoting him boasting about the decision and taking credit for putting three conservative justices on the court. In a clear statement of intent that reproductive rights will be at the forefront of his re-election message, Biden warns that the Roe versus Wade would be just the beginning for Trump's MAGA Republican followers. They're going to try to ban the right to choose nationwide, he says. They're coming for birth control and IVF next. We're up against extremism. Send me back to the White House and I'll fight like hell to restore Roe versus Wade and protect American freedom. Concerns over reproductive rights are among the Democrats' best campaign policies for returning President Biden to the White House in November. Since Roe versus Wade was overthrown in 2022, ballots in several states, including ones that tend to vote Republican, have upheld or enshrined abortion rights locally, a sign that the issue is strongly supported by women voters across America. So, an interesting tactic by Biden. He is behind in many polls, although some disagree with that. This is clearly a pitch to many women voters, and the thought that there will also be independent ballots within the states so that abortion is enshrined within the individual state's constitution at the same time as the general election. They're hoping will bring more people out to vote in the presidential election. Is it a sound strategy?
It's probably one of the best things Joe Biden has got because he is struggling in the polls. And this obviously is coming up with his pollsters' analyses as one of the hot button issues on which he feels he might win, and particularly with women voters. Possibly also one that will bring people out to vote because I think there is some fairly strong feeling about it. It is interesting that a lot of the states looking at enshrining abortion rights in the state constitution would typically vote Republicans. So it's not necessarily a vote-winning issue for Republicans. So, yeah, I think it's a sound enough strategy. He is painting Donald Trump as coming for other things next. I'm not so sure he's got that sort of coherent a strategy, to be honest. I think Donald Trump looks for hot button issues as well. In some of the speeches he's been making lately, he's backpedaled from the idea that he might ban abortion nationwide and has seemingly been more open to individual states deciding what they want to do. The problem with that is it's very difficult to predict what Donald Trump would do. So he blows hot or cold depending on what's in his mind at any given time. And that's a particularly hard thing to glimpse. But for Biden, I think, particularly on the second anniversary of Roe versus Wade, it's a good strategy. And no doubt his pollsters will be eagerly watching to see whether it's effective.
Yeah, I'm interested. Something which has always baffled me that the Republican Party, all right, there's maybe a strong religious influence in some parts of it, but it has always championed itself as the party of freedom. And freedom to choose just seems to be an absolutely obvious thing, which would be a Republican idea. Can you enlighten me as to why they have taken this hard line on abortion?
Well, I think the religious element is important. And I dare say that in, uh, in talking about I was able to kill Roe versus Wade as Trump did, he's playing to that gallery. Whether that's actually as strong a gallery as he thinks, I don't know. I suspect these days it possibly isn't. So, yeah, I'm. I've never really been able to understand many things that political parties do because there are so many contradictions. This is just one of them.
Indeed, and of course, Joe Biden makes a great thing of his Catholic faith also. So, yes, who
Indeed.
knows? Turning back to Scotland again, from today, thousands more unpaid carers in Angus and North and South Lanarkshire can apply for the Scottish Government's carer support payment, which replaces carers allowance. Carers living in these areas are the first to be able to apply for carer support payment since it was introduced in the pilot areas of Perth and Kinross, Dundee City, and the Highland and Shire, Western Isles in November 2023. New rules that come into effect today also mean the benefit paid by Social Security Scotland is available to more student carers. Since its introduction, the benefit has been available to carers aged 16 to 19 in full-time advanced education, carers over 20 in full-time education at any level, as well as carers in part-time education. However, from today, some 16 to 19-year-old carers in full-time non-advanced education, such as school, are also eligible for carer support payment. In addition, some carers, mostly full-time students, can now have their benefit payments backdated to when carer support payment was first introduced. The benefit will be rolled out to more local authorities in the next few months and will be available in all of Scotland from 4th of November. Carers who live in areas where carer support payment is not yet available are urged to apply for carers allowance to make sure they don't miss out on support. Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Ann Somerville, said, "I'm delighted that more carers in Scotland can now get carer support payment, and I urge every carer who is eligible for the benefit to apply as soon as possible. I also encourage anyone who thinks they might be eligible to check if they can apply. This includes students studying full-time who are not eligible for carers allowance." William, you live in one of the areas where the pilot program for this was run out, if I'm correct, in Perth and Kinross. Um,
Correct.
have you any personal knowledge, hearsay evidence of how it worked?
Yes, we have a carer working at, well, not working at, he comes into the hub a couple of times a week, sometimes with his mother for whom he cares. And they speak very highly of the carer support payment and the thinking behind it, because it's a different approach in that it actually seeks to help the people who are in receipt of the payment. It's not, as so often happens with the DWP, that there's a kind of accusatory approach that you might be trying to pockle them, or the sort of hostile environment. They found that the process was much, much smoother and more humane. And that's an important facet of the way Scotland should be approaching the benefit system. And it's good to see that that is happening. I think the better we do these things, the better we can illustrate what things might be like in an independent Scotland when we actually had all the levers available instead of just some of them. My one slight caveat is because I think it's probably going to lead to more claims being accepted, what the implications are then financially, whether we'll be able to keep up to it while we have the limited budget. But that's a problem for the future. And I'm sure that the Scottish Government has the wit to deal with that. It certainly has taken the right approach so far. So, yep, I'm very supportive of this.
It's interesting you say there that this is a way that the Scottish Government could show how things could be in Scotland, but it's a difficult one, isn't it? If they shout this from the rooftops as being a success, which it seems to have been, people will say, "Oh, you're campaigning on devolved issues, and you shouldn't do that because you've criticised the Labour Party and the Tories for trying to bring devolved issues into this general election campaign." So should they champion it? Should they keep quiet about it and save it for the Scottish election?
Well, the Scottish election, I think, is already being fought
Yes.
under the surface of this Westminster election. And if your opponents are going to fight the election on Holyrood, then it's not necessarily hypocritical for you to fight back in the same way while saying this is daft to do this. So I think the Scottish Government and those of us who support independence have our work cut out to make the case to the 50% of people who still do not feel able to commit themselves to independence. So the sooner the better. And yeah, I'd fully applaud the Scottish Government shouting this from the rooftops. They won't get any help shouting it from the rooftops, so they might as well shout as loudly as they can.
Yes. Yes, I noticed a distinct lack of coverage of this in news elsewhere today. Staying in Scotland for our last story, the University of Glasgow is welcoming guests from around the world to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the birth of Lord Kelvin. This week, the university will host a series of public events, a Kelvin-inspired art exhibition, and an international symposium on the legacy of the man born William Thomson in Belfast on June 26, 1824. Kelvin grew up to be one of the 19th century's most accomplished scientists, making breakthrough contributions to physics, engineering, and mathematics during his near lifelong career at the University of Glasgow, where he enrolled as a student aged just 10. Each event will cast new light on Kelvin's life of invention, innovation, and inspiration through expert lectures, the display of historical items and records, and artistic interpretation. On June the 25th, the Lord Kelvin Beyond Absolute Zero exhibition will begin a 2-week run at the university's Maison d'Archon Advanced Research Centre, ARC. The exhibition will showcase historical items, including an antique Kelvin-designed voltmeter, one of the commercial products he created following his developments of accurate methods of measuring electricity. Through videos and text displays, visitors can learn about Kelvin's life and work and some of his lesser-known achievements, including work on chirality, a key scientific concept of molecular symmetry with important applications in biology. Kelvin's mathematical formula for the most efficient space-filling shape, which remained unsurpassed until 1993, is part of the inspiration for 2 new paintings created by artist Gregor Harvey in collaboration with researchers from the university's School of Physics and Astronomy. The large canvases, one filled with colour and one monochrome, depict the universes of light and dark matter, each depicting an intricate lattice of computer-modelled Kelvin cells inspired by Kelvin's mathematical formula. Gregor Harvey said there has always been a relationship between art and science. They draw on the same pool of cultural and environmental knowledge and have often explored similar ideas. Physics, like art, is a search for patterns, things that can be recognized and described. The full program is available to see on the University of Glasgow's website. So, William, a good news Scottish story to finish on there, and a lesson also there, perhaps for Steve Clark planning for the future. If you're old enough, you're good enough. Lord Kelvin starting his university career at age 10. Um,
Yes.
I have
Interesting.
plenty memories of
Yeah.
Kelvin from physics, so
I
what
didn't
is your
expect
reflection
Steve
on him?
Clark to come into a Lord Kelvin discussion. There you are. Well,
I had to get it in.
actually, interestingly for football, the Kelvin dictum was when you can measure what you're speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. But when you can't measure it, when you can't express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meagre and unsatisfactory kind. So I would offer you the numbers of 4 shots in 3 games. That tells me something. And if I didn't know that, I think my knowledge would be far more meagre. But all power to Lord Kelvin. What a polymath he was. Not only did he go to university at the age of 10 and ultimately specialize in physics and mathematics, etc., etc., he also won a prize for ancient Greek translation at the age of 12. Um, a true polymath, and yet well worth celebrating, and one of the towering people in Scottish history that, of course, we should celebrate, and very much attached to Glasgow University, taking his name from the river that runs by it when he accepted his peerage.
Yeah, interesting. I'd hoped that it was my own fault. I wanted to end on a cheery note, and then you brought up the statistics from the football. But there we are. That's the reality.
The future will be better. That's the cheery thing.
Okay, let's hope so. Let's hope that applies to football as well as politics. So I'd like to thank you very much for being our guest this evening. Insightful and interesting as always, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
So that wraps it up for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. So thank you again to our guest tonight, William Duguid. Goodbye, and thank you very much for watching.